Strange Shadows, a Carcash and Smith podcast.
The sand of the desert of Yondo is not as the sand of other deserts, for Yondo lies nearest of all to the world's rim, and strange winds blowing from a pit no astronomer may hope to fathom have sown its ruinous fields with the grey dust of corroding planets, the black ashes of extinguished suns. The dark orb-like mountains which rise from its wrinkled and pitted plain are not all its own, for some are fallen asteroids, half buried in that abysmal sand. Things have crept in from nether space, whose incursion is forbid by the gods of all proper and well-ordered lands. But there are no such gods in Yondo, where live the hoary genii of stars abolished, and decrepit demons left homeless by the destruction of antiquated hells.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to episode 2 of Strange Shadows. The voice you just heard was Robert Lloyd Parry of Monkey Productions, renowned performer of M.R. James stories, and currently touring the UK with Gallery of Screams, with a performance of 2 Lovecraft stories, Pickman's Model and the music of Eric Zahn. And there you heard Robert read in the first paragraph of The Abominations of Yondo, today's story. I'm one of your hosts, Rob Poyton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yes, so today we're going to be covering Abominations of Yondo, which appeared in the April 1926 issue of the Overland Monthly.
Oh, right, so it wasn't a Weird Tales tale then?
No, apparently not.
I gather it was Smith's first sort of real weird fiction story. He'd obviously written a lot of poetry up until that point. And this was largely written at the prompting of Mr. Lovecraft, I believe.
It was indeed, yeah. Yeah, he submitted it to Weird Tales at Lovecraft's prompting, but it got rejected. Farnsworth Wright returned it, describing it as a fascinating bit, but a prose poem rather than a weird narrative.
I think, as we discussed in our first issue, Farnsworth Wright had a very strange attitude towards Smith's work.
He did, didn't he? Yeah. Yeah. Which is very strange. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand at all, because like the language used in it is obviously something we're going to talk about a lot as we go through. It's just so rich, and for me, it's almost like a fever dream.
Yes, it has a sort of a nightmare quality almost, doesn't it?
It really does, because it's you know it doesn't jump in that time or anything like that. It is just a narrative,
and it is interesting that Smith's poetic mentor, George Sterling, called the story a magnificent exercise in imagination, which it is, but then added, I don't advise you to devote much time to such things, however. The mind of man begins to smile at anything that is inherently absurd and outdated. Your faculties are far too fine to be wasted on such vacua. It's quite interesting, really. I mean, obviously Smith had that early success as a poet, and perhaps sort of Sterling was advising him to stick. You can make money at that. Perhaps I don't know.
Yeah, it seems a bit harsh to me.
yeah.
Vacua. I like it.
But it was then Sterling who placed it with Overland Monthly because he had a regular column in there. Though he said that Smith was truly naive in imagining you could have the Yondo poem accepted by any magazine that pays. But it was, and it did.
Yeah. So. And it did, yeah. And it was also the title of his first collection, wasn't it? Knockham House collection.
Yes, that was 1960, I think, wasn't it? That was released.
Yeah. And it's a superb story. And in the introduction to the Nightshade Books collection that we're reading from, Ramsey Campbell draws attention to the first line. The sand of the desert of Yondo is not as the sand of other deserts, for Yondo lies nearest of all to the world's rim. There you go, right from the start. It's just...
It made me think of this story. Well, obviously we'll get on to some of the ideas and themes in it. It's quite a short story. In some ways, not a lot happens. It's a guy walking through a desert, basically, and then running away.
Yes.
But the richness of the setting, it's so evocative. And straight away in this very first paragraph, we get this idea about strange winds blowing from gulfs no astronomer may hope to fathom. And the grey dust of corroding planets.
Yeah.
And this idea that this desert has been formed from fallen asteroids.
Yeah. The black ashes of extinguished suns.
Yeah. And things have crept in.
Yeah.
Almost like things that existed on these planets or these asteroids came in with them and now inhabit this desert. So I thought at one point it was sort of almost like a post-apocalyptic setting.
Yes.
Almost like a Planet of the Apes kind of setting, you know?
Yeah, there is that, isn't there? It's interesting because Campbell describes that first paragraph as a prose poem in itself. And it kind of is. He's not wrong there. Because you've got these lovely descriptions, the dark orb-like mountains which rise from its wrinkled and pitted plain. You know, it's you do get this sort of sense of desolation and ruin, you know. And
I love the decrepit demons left homeless by the destruction of antiquated hells.
Oh, antiquated hells. That's a great. That's a good.
Now we're both sort of involved in music, and we do like a good band name, as you find out. And there's several in this which we'll mention as we go along. I think the first one that struck me was the Inquisitors of Ong, who I'm sure had an album out in 1975, I think. But
yeah, I like Abysmal Sand. That's a good one. Yeah.
So we've got this setting, which in the space of the first paragraph is very evocative and very strange.
Yeah.
And this is all from the point of view of our protagonist, who, in good Weird Tales style, is never named. We don't know what he looks like, who he is and what he does. Nothing about him at all. Yeah. It's all about the setting and the atmosphere.
Yes. I like the fact as well that at the start of the next paragraph, he goes on to this, the noon of a vernal day, and he's going through this interminable cactus forest, and he's been left there by the Inquisitors of Ong. So he's obviously done something to displease them.
Yes.
But it's never said quite what, I don't think.
Well, we get this little description in the sort of next paragraph that says, I will not detail the indiscretions which had led me, a careless stranger from far-off lands, into the power of those dreadful magicians. And now here comes a word. We're going to try and pick a favourite word because there's so many to choose from. But our favourite word for this story is Mysteriarchs.
Yes.
Which is the Mysteriarchs is another great band name.
Isn't it just? Yeah.
And I think we both said this is a word we'd never encountered before.
No. And it's such a great word. Yeah. If we were Sesame Street, which we're going to do, aren't we? Today has been brought to you by the word Mysteriarchs.
And it's quite a simple meaning. It's from the Greek, and it's one who presides over mysteries.
Yep.
Or in some religious traditions, it's the person who presides over the sacraments.
Ah.
So there you get this lovely idea of the magicians being priests as well.
Yes. Keepers of knowledge and, yeah.
And this is and they serve the lion-headed Ong, which, again, it gives you just enough to pique your imagination, but there's no other detail than that.
Yeah.
But I can almost picture lion-headed Ong.
Yeah, I can as well. But I love the fact that it just says, indiscretions and particulars of his arrest are painful to remember. So it's left up to the reader, which I always like in this kind of story, because you get from his unwillingness to talk about it and the fact that they give it they've done this to him, right? It must have been pretty bad.
Well, you're thinking, could this be like the Inquisitors obviously conjures up images of the we won't mention the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
So you're thinking like heresy or that kind of thing, but then indiscretions sounds a little bit more like
sounds a bit more fruity, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? And given this is Smith, you wonder if he was
and considering that a piece later on when he gets distracted by, let's say, the female form, maybe he was knocking off one of the Inquisitor's misses or something like that. You don't know, do you?
But whatever he did, he paid heavily for it, right? Because we get mentions of the racks of dragon guts strewn with powdered adamant on which men are stretched naked. I guess adamant is almost like hard as diamonds in it, so these sort of things cutting into you, perhaps, or something like that.
Yeah.
Again, it's not overly graphic, but it's highly suggestive.
Yeah, and then the next bit, the unlit room with 6-inch windows near the sill where bloated corpse worms crawled in by hundreds from a neighbouring catacomb. It's like...
Isn't that nice? You go from this suggestive thing to a totally full-on graphic image, right, of being locked in this tiny dark cell with maggots pouring in
from a catacomb. Fat, bloated grave worms. Yeah. Which is something I'm sure we'll touch upon. That Smith mentions maggots and grave worms quite a lot. They're one of his go-tos, you know.
Do you think that's partly the sort of Poe influence there coming in?
I think so. I think so, yeah. Because Robert Chambers was the same, wasn't he? With his grave worms.
Yes. So, yeah, he undergoes these tortures and then they seem to strap him on the back of a camel, blindfold him, and is sort of sent off for what seems like hours. I guess he's got no way of knowing the time. Yeah. And is left in morning twilight in the sinister forest that he's at the edge of at the beginning of the story. They're not being totally bad to him, though, because they do give him a loaf of coarse bread and a leathern bottle of rank water. And he's banished, in effect. Yeah, pretty much. It's almost like the stag night from hell, isn't it? He's driven out, blindfolded, driven out into the middle of nowhere to find your own way home. It's like the stag night from hell. Some people go to Prague, others go to Yondo. Now there's a t-shirt. Easy jet, yeah. Easy jet, yeah. Easy jet to Yondo. Yeah. Yeah. So by noon of the same day, he comes to the desert of Yondo. And he hadn't thought of turning back, but he's walking through all these rotting cacti and all the evil, furtive things that dwell amongst them. Yeah, we get a nice description of the forest, don't there, with its monstrous fungi with hueless stems and nodding heads of poisonous mauve. Yeah. Again, it's so vivid and baroque. Yes. But if he thinks the forest is bad, then the desert promises to be even worse. Because he's heard stories about this place, right? There's legends. Yeah. Young is a place where few have ventured. Wittingly and of their own accord, fewer still have returned. I love this passage here, A few still have returned, babbling of unknown horrors and strange treasure, and the lifelong palsy which shakes their withered limbs, together with the mad gleam in their staring eyes beneath whitened brows and lashes. It is not an incentive for others to follow. It's really not, So even the ones who made it back are totally altered by the experience. Yeah. And I love this line as well. It was dreadful to go on and dreadful to go back, because he faces madness ahead and certain death behind. Yeah, I like that. It's the classic stuck between a rock and a hard place, isn't it? He's, And I thought immediately with this one, again, we'll get into that a little bit more later on when he encounters these creatures. If this... We have sort of similar sort of things in Robert E. Howard sometimes. I'm thinking like the Slithering Shadow, where they're in the desert and they come across the city. But with the Conan stories, he's going to pretty much overcome whatever's there and probably nick its treasure and that kind of stuff. Yes. This has none of that in it at all. It's more Lovecraftian in that sense. Very much so, yeah. You see, you get echoes of like the Nameless City and things like that, don't you? Of like some wayfarer stumbling across some strange land and there's no hope. Yeah. It's either a desert and death one way or madness and, God knows what else the other. Yeah. So he has to go on. And we get this nice little reference back to his torture, because he steps onto the ashen sands and he feels the tremor of a new fear in his wrenched vitals. Again, wonderfully suggestive, is being stretched out on the rack and is probably not in great shape. No, he won't be. And all he's got is a loaf of bread and some rank water. He's not going to be in sound mind and body, is he? And the first thing we get, the first I guess, life form or strange creatures are these insects.
Long-legged insects that he'd met among the cacti. I love this description. The colour of week-old corpse and large as tarantulas. I mean, there's just an image already, isn't it? You get these, pallid sort of
spidery things that are quite big, and also they have. He treads on one, doesn't he? He squishes one.
He does, yes.
And that releases a mephitic stench that was more nauseous even than their colour.
Yeah.
It's visceral, and we've got sight, we've got sound, we've got smell. Yeah. It puts you in there.
Yeah. There's something that I've always found that Smith is so good at is involving your senses. You get a lot of smell and taste and scent, and almost like for a written word, it's very tactile. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's part of that richness again, isn't it? It's quite an immersive experience,
Yeah, but I guess that's the poetic background.
Yeah.
I guess because poetry is all about involving the senses and that kind of thing, isn't it? So I guess that is his poetic leanings and poetic background coming to the fore there.
So he sets off, and he soon finds out that as horrible as these spider things are, they're the least of his worries.
Yeah.
Which is, again, a nice bleak touch, isn't it? Things are worse. They're going to get worse.
Very much so, yeah. Yeah, because once he goes through past the All-Black Mountains that he mentioned earlier on and all the rest of it. And I love this when he comes to sort of almost civilization, I guess you'd call it. And he's talking about fallen cypresses that rotted by crumbling mausoleums, whose lichen blotted marble fat chameleons crept with royal pearls in their mouths. It's just a great image again, isn't it? It's just decay.
It's decay, isn't it? And again, that's what put me in mind of that post-apocalyptic setting, or perhaps it's just been I don't know that it's been a natural occurrence, because it feels to me like we've had this asteroids or something has come down from the stars, and blasted this area, and everything's in ruin and decay.
Yeah, it's obviously a land that's now sort of forbidden. It's one of those classic forbidden lands. Don't go there. The meteors kill. Everything's diseased. Similar to what Colour Out of Space did with the Blasted Heath, I guess.
Yeah. And I was thinking like your Cursed Earth stuff with Judge Dredd, and that kind of
thing. Yeah, actually, yeah, very much so.
And again, I think in Planet of the Apes, wasn't it called the Forbidden Zone or something?
The Forbidden Zone.
Yeah. And we get this idea of hidden by low ridges were cities of which no stela remained unbroken, immense and immemorial cities lapsing shard by shard, atom by atom, to feed infinities of desolation. There's the album name, Infinities of Desolation.
That's the Infinities of Desolation, yeah. And again, now we get another, as he's talking about this journey, we get another mention of his torture-weakened limbs. Dragging his torture-weakened limbs over vast rubbish heaps that had once been mighty temples. Again, you just get that feeling of like, yeah, this guy hasn't got a hope. It's bleak, isn't it? But picturesque. It's like picturesque bleakness. It's strange.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we mentioned in episode 1 this idea about, even in the UK, you can be quite close to civilization, in inverted commas, but places can be quite desolate and bleak.
Very much so, yeah.
And this is again is alone. It's desolate. The only things around him, there's nothing friendly. There's nothing he can communicate with. It seems totally isolated.
Yeah.
And what options does he have?
Yeah, it actually brings to mind somewhere I was recently, which down on the Kent coast, just outside of Rye. It's the Salt Flats, and there was a town there, but it's sunk and it's all underneath these salt flats on the coast. And it's like there's a nature reserve, but once you walk past that, there's nothing. It's just flat, and there's just like bits of masonry sticking out of the sand and stuff like that. And it does look like something out of some post-apocalyptic movie, and it's it's like 2 minutes away from a bustling town, but you stand there and you were in this, and this is the sort of same feel that I get from this, that sort of loneliness, that
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing else wholesome alive here. Everything that's alive here wants to eat you, you know.
Well, this is the thing, because from here he comes to a lake, right? The waters of a weird lake, unfathomably dark and green as malachite, and set with bards of profulgent salt. I had to look up profulgent and profulgent. We have to look a lot of things up in these stories because even though we're writers, our vocabulary is not as extensive as we'd like.
Yeah.
Profulgent perhaps, but basically shining.
Yes.
So again, a very vivid colour. But you think, oh right, well, at least he can get some water now. So of course he takes a drink, or he washes his hands in it first, and it's like acid. It's corrosive.
Yeah, corrosive. Yeah.
Even the water is unfriendly.
Yeah, but that's it. And I don't know about you, but I got echoes of Robert Chambers's Lake of Harley.
Oh yes,
the lightless Lake of Harley. It's like the black waters and all that. I kind of got the same sort of vibes here of that, you know, and it's a similar kind of thing. You know, the Carcosa. It's not that dissimilar to this in terms of.
It could almost be that setting, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could. Yeah, I mean, it's very similar kind of thing, and it's got the same sort of quality of like, nothing's good here, nothing.
And I did just like this little mention as well. Again, there's each sentence, there's so many little bits. He tries washing his hands, it stings, he moves away from it, preferring the desert dust that had wrapped around me like a slow shroud. So we already get this sense of his demise. Yeah. And the desert recognises this. It's already enfolding him in his grave shroud.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's something Smith touches quite a lot is the inevitability of death. It is a recurring theme. And again, I mean, that might come from the Poe, and it might come from his life experiences as well. Because like we say, he was always kind of sickly. And so, you know.
Yeah, and I think didn't his early girlfriend, or perhaps even his first wife, died quite young, I believe.
Yeah. So do you think he must have had a sense of his own mortality?
Yes.
Especially when he was so sick as a kid. Yeah. And all the rest of it, he must have had a sense of his own mortality. So that's probably coming through in that, you know, the same way with Poe, with all this melancholy and all that, it's coming through. And a lot of it, especially this, is just, you know, it is the inevitability of death, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's that. And then the other major thing we see in a lot of his work is the sense of loss as well.
Yeah.
Or of yearning for something that you have lost and you can't
get it back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether it be time or a person or even culture, you know, it's like it is. Yeah.
And we get a little bit of sort of world building here. I think this is odd because this is, again, not a long story, but I have quite a sense of this world. I've got images in my mind of this place, and it feels like it wouldn't take much to sketch it out and use it as a setting for an RPG or
a video game or something.
Yeah, or even other stories, you know.
Well, it's interesting because this is something I wanted to bring up at some point because it's never mentioned where Yondo really is, but it is included in Lynn Carter's Hyperborea collection. So it's kind of lumped in with the Hyperborea stories.
Right.
So, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether I would lump it in with that or not, but I don't know. But it's interesting.
It does kind of feel in some ways, I think, like I mentioned before, a sort of a bit of a Howardian setting. Yeah. When you think of the Slithering Shadow or Almuric, particularly, where he goes to the other planet, the desert planet, and it has something of that quality about it, and ruined cities and that kind of stuff. Yes. So that to me would fit if it was Smith's Hyborian age back in the ancient past.
Yeah, exactly. So it's obviously, and a lot of that kind of stuff does focus on the downfall of that civilization. Yeah. So maybe this is kind of like, you know, the dying gasps, you know. Yeah.
Perhaps the desert expands, you know, that might be a possibility. Well, deserts do expand, right? Oh, yeah. Perhaps this one is expanding at a rate of knots, and that's what eventually finishes the Hyborian age or cycle. But it's this idea of he thinks if he can get northwards, he knows there's lands to the north of Yondo, and they're desolate, but they're kind of natural desolate. And there's tribes of nomads there who he's had dealings with before. So again, it's just a little line or two, but it gives you this sense of the world and the place, and there's other things going on.
Yeah.
We don't know how big Yondo is, how big this desert is.
No, and I love this next bit because he talks about he'd just eaten his loaf of bread, and that had revived him a little bit, and the thought of that he knew that there was these places with these nomads had actually given him a glimmer of hope, and then in the next second it's taken away from him because he realised that the corpse-coloured insects had long ceased to follow him.
This is this nice thing where the little monster that you think, oh, that's not very nice, suddenly gets scared off by the bigger monster. You think, oh, shit.
Exactly. It's like the classic Jurassic Park, isn't it? With the little compy things that are like following this guy, and then they stop and go away, and the guy's kind of like, ah ha ha ha, and then he gets eaten by a T-Rex, you know.
And this is a really creepy one because he hears a chuckle, a diabolical chuckle, which no one wants to hear when they're somewhere on their own. There's
something about my brain because reading it again this morning, I got Sid James's chuckle in my head. Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine that creep you out, wouldn't it?
Carry on, Yondo. And it seems to be emanating from a dark cave, the mouth of a dark cave fanged with green stalactites. So there's another nice little image. There's a mouth all ready to eat him.
Yep.
He stares. I mean, would you stare or would you run or what? But I suppose curiosity will get the better of most of us.
Yeah, and you've got to remember, he's been walking around in a desert. All he's had is a loaf of bread. He's been tortured. He's not going to be a bit...
Could be a person, I suppose.
Yeah.
with a diabolical chuckle.
Exactly, yeah.
But it isn't.
No.
It's a monstrous thing. Yeah. Emerges with the rapidity of nightmare. Pale, hairless, egg-shaped body large as that of a gravid she-goat. Now, isn't that...
I love that word. I love a gravid she-goat.
And this body was mounted on nine, not 8 like a spider, but 9 long wavering legs with many flanges like the legs of some enormous spider. And the weird thing here for me was it runs past him.
Yeah, I love that.
You're sort of expecting the attack or something, but it's not even that significant.
No, just wrong foot. It's the spider thing, doesn't even care about him. You know, even that is indifferent to him. And I love that. Like as it runs past, he sees that it's got no eyes in its oddly sloping face, but 2 knife-like ears rising high above its head, and a thin, wrinkled snout hanging down across its mouth.
And flabby lips that, when it chuckles, reveal rows of bat's teeth. I mean, this is a real nightmare thing, isn't it? This is.
It is, isn't it?
This isn't just a giant spider, is it? This is a composite of. Well, we said nightmare before. Perhaps it's one of those sort of nightmare type creatures that you have in a bad dream.
Yeah, but sort of fever dream kind of thing. And again, that's why I get sort of. I think there is quite a lot of comparisons to Lovecraft's Nameless City in this.
Yeah,
it is like a nightmare narrative, and it is very similar. And the further he goes on, he can't go back. The further he goes on, the worse it gets, but he's got to keep going. And the horrors just keep coming and coming and coming, which I think is brilliantly done. And I love the fact that this spider thing just goes and starts drinking that corrosive acid stuff out of the lake. Yeah.
And then it seems to notice him, or it starts sniffing around, and it gets some sense that he's there. And he doesn't know whether the creature would have fled or whether it meant to assail me. I do not know, because he runs, and who can blame him?
Yeah, exactly.
So he's off away through the boulders and the great bars of salt up on the lake shore.
Yep.
And it's kind of out of the frying pan into the fire again. I love this sort of building worse and worse sensation.
Yeah, I do.
So he sits down to catch his breath back, and he thinks, phew, and something screams.
Yeah, it's a scream that rose. He said it's not from like a distance. It's described as a scream that rose at my very elbow.
And the scream of a woman, no less, possessed by some atrocious agony or helpless in the grip of devils. So he turns and he sees what he describes as a veritable Venus. Now, the use of the word Venus or name Venus is quite interesting because
it is.
That implies Greek mythology, right? But we're obviously not in ancient Greece, or are we? I mean, it's.
Well, that's it. That's like how it's unclear, isn't it? It's. I mean, who's to say that these guys, these Inquisition, haven't? You know, it says they're magicians and wizards and all the rest of it. Who's to say they haven't taken him somewhere else?
Yeah.
No.
So he sees a naked. Well, this is where, as you mentioned, a veritable Venus, naked in a white perfection that could fear no scrutiny, but immersed to her navel in the sand.
Yeah.
Her terror-widened eyes implored me, and her lotus hands reached out with a beseeching gesture. And he springs to her side to help.
Yep.
And he touches cold marble.
A statue. Yeah. Marble. Love it.
And I thought immediately of this. This must have been the idea, or the basis of the idea for the disinterment of Venus.
Yeah.
Which we'll be reading later on. Which is pretty much the same thing as Statue of Venus. That we'll go into that when we get to it. But it doesn't have good intentions.
No. But yeah, and again, I think it's like that presenting of hope, and then snatching it away again, because for a moment he wasn't alone. For a moment, there was this lovely looking lass in the sand. He could help her, then they could help each other. There's a bit of hope there.
That'd be the Robert E. Howard thing.
It would, wouldn't
he
it?
Rescues a woman and they get out, and then he kills the monster and
and then they go back and the rumpy. But and again, it's just like dangling a little carrot of hope and then snatching it away.
And then you think, well, who is this woman? Is she someone that wandered into the desert and this happened to? Or was she put there like this? Where did she come from? You with all these creatures that he meets, they've all got a backstory, right? Yeah. And
I like the fact that he's freaked out, obviously, by this. And then he flees and he hears the scream of the woman's agony. But he doesn't dare turn around to look. Is
it like a siren kind of deal?
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Please come in and help me, and then when you get close enough. Or is it genuinely a person trapped in this hellish form who probably by now has gone totally insane,
Yeah. Or is it his own insanity?
Yes.
Yeah. Hearing things where there isn't, and seeing life where there is just a statue.
That's a good point, because we've got the unreliable narrator sort of idea, which happens a lot in all the weird fiction, right?
Very much so. Well, this is it. I mean, by this point, after seeing a big spider monster and walking around, probably, he's starving, he's thirsty, he's been tortured. Let's face it, he's going to have lost the plot a little bit, isn't he? So,
Now, the third weird encounter is the shadow, right? And this was nice. And again, this put me in mind of his latest story, The Double Shadow, which is kind of along similar lines. So it's interesting to see how perhaps he went back and took some of these earlier ideas and revisited them and adapted them.
Yeah, well, you actually find that a lot in Smith, where he'll just sort of name drop things, places, creatures, and then he'll revisit them in later stories, which is something I do, and Lovecraft does, and people like that. It's like, and I like that, like, even through his different lands, through like, Atlantis and Mu and Hyperborea and France and all the rest of it, there's all these links.
Threads, and it's like threads running through.
Yeah.
So he's running, and his shadow follows him. It runs pace by pace with his own, and it's not the shadow of a man or an ape, nor any known beast, because the head was too grotesquely elongated, the squat body too gibbous, and I like this, he couldn't determine whether the shadow possessed 5 legs or if the 5th leg was a towel.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of odd,
or something something worse.
Do you think that's an implication there?
Yeah, exactly. That's
appendages.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking. It's just like, why? Something worse than a tail. Yeah.
You wonder what its motivation is.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. Says in the next breath, doesn't it, that terror lent him a new strength, and it would, wouldn't it? If something like that was chasing you, you'd run.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he gets this sickening odour as it draws closer as well, which I guess is kind of familiar with because we had that earlier piece about the recently fed maggots coming in from the charnel house.
But I love the description. Foul as the odour of bats who have hung in a charnel house amid the mould of corruption.
The mould of corruption. There's another album name, you see.
There's another one, isn't there?
If you're going to start a goth band, folks, then plunder Clark Ashton Smith for band names, album names, song titles.
Song titles, yeah.
But he manages to, or he finds sanctuary because he finds this circle of small pillars, miraculously unbroken amidst the ruins. And when he goes into the pillars, he hears a whimper from the shadow and it doesn't follow him. So this is obviously some kind of temple or holy place.
Yeah, and the whimper is described as like somewhere between rage and fear.
Yeah.
So again, it's incredibly suggestive, isn't it? Like the insects before. Has he got somewhere that even they won't go, you know?
It is, and the idea of rage and fear, this thing is obviously frustrated at not being able to catch him or...
Yeah, that its prey's escaped, but also, I'm not going in there.
Yeah. So what is this thing scared of, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And he just basically stands there for half an hour, but it starts to get dark. Night is falling. And I love this. The sunlight altered strangely, for the red orb nearing the mounded horizon sank and smouldered in a belt of miasmal haze, where floating dust from all the shattered fanes and acropoli of Yondo was mixed with evil vapours coiling skyward from black enormous gulfs lying beyond the utmost rim of the world.
Which again is a callback to that beautiful opening paragraph, isn't it? It's, again, you got that poetic... You know, this is superb.
And the sort of red sun there, I mean, I know the sun when it goes down is red, but that also does put me in mind of the dying earth type scenario.
Again. And it's one of those images that's always used to conjure like incoming threat. It's like in horror movies, like a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
It's a great example.
Absolutely.
You've got the red sun going down over outback of Texas. Nothing good's going to happen now.
And there's something about, because it's a little bit like the moon when it rises or the sun when it goes, they increase in size. There's something about that largeness that is unsettling in some way.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So then we get weird creature number 4. I called this one the Warrior. Number 4, the Warrior.
The Warrior. Yeah. Got another word here that I had to look up. Yeah, the tall man fully caparisoned.
Yeah.
Basically, you know, encased in chainmail.
Yes, because that was like the medieval horses when they had all that gear on, but were caparisons.
Yes, yeah.
And that's kind of what it sounds like. Well, the armour is made of brass, right? Which is, I guess there was certainly bronze armour, wasn't there? And
yes,
metal plate.
I like the fact that it's brass, but it's also mottled with verdigris. So again, you've got that decay.
Yeah.
Everything reeks of decay. Yeah.
And it's got the helmet that it's wearing is pretty cool. It's furnished with coiling horns and a serrate comb rising high above the head. So this is some sort of, I don't know, Spartan meets Viking sort of very fantastic armour. It's nothing historic, is it?
No. But again, it's like again with the weird spidery thing. You perceive that he's got no face.
Yes.
Beneath the brows of the bizarre helmet, there's no face.
Yeah. And again, this thing just sort of ignores him, like the spider did here.
Yeah.
It just clanks past
Clanking
him.
dismally and then vanished.
Yeah. So is this thing on some quest, or is it just cursed to wander around the desert?
I mean, is that kind of what this place is? Is that it kind of like almost like Silent Hill? You know, you kind of do to walk it in your own personal torment kind of thing. Purgatory?
Yeah, that purgatory idea. Yeah, you're stuck there as a statue. You're doomed to walk the sands or whatever. But that has barely had time to leave his line of sight when number 5 turns up.
Yeah.
In some ways, the weirdest of all. The mummy.
Yeah. The monstrous mummy of some ancient king, still crowned with untarnished gold. Broken swathings flapped around the skeleton legs. I love it. It's almost King in Yellow-esque, isn't it? It's
It is, and Nyarlathotep as well.
Yes.
Sprung to mind for me. Anything with your mummies has got to be associated there. Now,
oh yeah.
I had to read this a few times to get this, because above the crown that was set with sapphires and balas rubies, a black something swayed and nodded horribly. But for an instant, I did not dream what it was. Then in its middle, 2 oblique and scarlet eyes opened and glowed like hellish coals, and 2 ophidian fangs glittered in an ape-like mouth. And this squat, furless, shapeless head, on a neck of disproportionate extent, leans down and whispers in the mummy's ear. So is this thing sort of sitting on its shoulders or on the mummy's head? Is it amongst the part of its crown or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's. I got there was some kind of like familiar, almost like in its crown, or it's being controlled by this thing. Maybe it was a parasite, or
that's what I wondered. Like a symbiotic thing, because the mummy is the legs, and this thing is the brain, kind of thing.
Yeah, almost like the cordyceps fungus that takes over the body of ants, kind of thing. Yeah. Or
what was the game with the face hugger things?
What, Half-Life with the head?
Half-Life,
yes. Head crabs. Yeah.
Yes, or maybe like Half-Life with the head crabs.
Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah,
that kind of.
They're kind of steering the body. Yeah.
I say at first you think it's like a snake, but then you get this idea of the ape mouth and the strange head on an elongated neck, which again sounds, we get ophidian fangs, so there's a snake reference there, but it sounds like a composite creature again.
Yeah, I got sort of Brown Jenkin vibes almost from it. It's interesting because later on, one of Clark Ashton Smith's creations is the spinner in the darkness at Naka, which is a big spider but with a human head.
That's nice.
He loves his composites, doesn't he? He loves his composite creatures, and it's almost like a call forward to that almost.
Yeah. Which I guess has its roots in myth, right? When you think of griffins and wyverns and that kind of stuff, but
cockatrice and all that kind of bit.
But they tend to be quite sort of noble creatures, don't they? It's the an eagle's head and a whatever wings and a lion's body. They're quite wholesome in a way. It's not like a spider's torso and a rat's face and a squid's tentacles.
Yeah, exactly. I love the fact that up until this point, the mummy thing was kind of indifferent to him, but it obviously whispers in his ear, and that's it then.
Yes, and I get the other thing. It just says the Titanic Lich. With one stride, it covers half the distance between them. So how big is this thing? How tall is it?
And out of the folds of the tattered cerecloth, a gaunt arm arose, with fleshless, taloned fingers laden with glowering gems, reached out for his throat.
Again, it's that sense of this was obviously a very important person, a king or a ruler or an emperor.
Yeah.
They're buried in all their finery, but now
fallen to decay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's being controlled by this weird, horrible creature as well.
Yeah. It's almost a parallel to Tolkien's Wormtongue, isn't it? With the King of Rohan, being controlled by this little parasitic kind of, guy. It's a very similar kind of thing to that. But again, it's just that thing of decay, isn't it? It's
and it's how the mighty have fallen.
Oh yeah, of course.
Which again is something that theme he returns to. Is it the Empire of the Necromancers I'm thinking of, where they revive all the kings of the past and have them as servants and worse, concubines even.
Yeah. Like he was a bit of a bastard in life, so he can muck out the toilets. That kind of business.
Well, that finally is enough to send him back through eons of madness and dread in a prone precipitate flight. So he runs from those fumbling fingers, and that's a nice thing, the fumbling fingers that hung always on the dusk behind me. So it's almost like this thing is pursuing him. He daren't look back, but he's got the feeling of it's just behind him.
Again, it's that inevitability that you can't escape death. I get the same feeling from this sort of bit as from Robert Bloch's Faceless God, where the guy's being chased all across the desert by Nyarlathotep.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of deal, isn't it?
It's relentless, isn't it?
Yeah, relentless. It's the old story, isn't it, of death, that he missed him in one town and then, yeah, I never meant to meet you there. I was always meant to meet you here.
Always gets you in the end.
Yeah.
So that's it. He runs back in the thickening twilight towards the nameless and sharded ruins, past the haunted lake, back into the forest of evil cacti.
Yeah.
And then his destination is the cruel and cynical inquisitors of Ong who waited my return. So did they just free him? They knew he was going to come back.
Yep. The whole thing was a torture. That's what I got from it.
That's beautiful.
The whole thing was an elaborate torture.
Yeah, you can go free. There you go.
Yeah. I love it, personally. I love that twist at the end of it, that they haven't set him free at all. They knew he'd be back. They knew he wouldn't get through it, you know.
He comes back tortured and raving mad for a bit more torture.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. It's just insidious, isn't it? It's just sadistic to a ridiculous degree.
Yeah. It is. It's that false hope, setting up the false hope. And like you say, even in that, there might even be a hope when he hears the woman scream and everything else. And they know this, right?
And the lake.
Yeah, there's water. Look, lovely water.
Yeah.
How colourful and bright it is.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what Overland Monthly, what sort of magazine that was.
No, it's one I'm not actually familiar with at all.
There is a PDF around of it of the story in the original magazine, but there's nothing else. Everything else has been redacted out. I don't know if that's for some sort of copyright reasons or whatever. I guess it might have been something to do with poetry, because Sterling had a regular column in there, Rhymes and Reactions. So I'm guessing it was some sort of literary magazine. Yeah,
literally more of a journal than a magazine, I guess.
Yeah, that's probably a better word, yeah. But, I mean, I wondered how this compares with what else was going in there. So, and Smith apparently was very pleased when Sterling told him that the story awoke many protests from the mentally infirm, I'm told. That presumably came from the editor. And Smith he was delighted with that. He said he felt that Yondo must have had a kick in it after all, if it aroused so many protests. Which, you know, when you get a reaction like that, you've done a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like when you get like films and all the critics are like, "Oh, it's horrible, it's disgusting." You've won.
Yeah.
You've won.
One thing worse than being talked about.
That's it. You know. Yeah. Well, it was. I saw a thread a while ago. It was I can't remember who it was, but it was a writer of extreme horror. He's one of these extreme horror writers, and he posted up, and it was basically, he took a screenshot of an Amazon review of one of his books, and his caption was, "So when does a bad review become marketing?" Because it basically, this was obviously by somebody who was quite religious and was outraged by the blasphemy and the sadism and the sickness, and it was morally corrupt, and every sort of like hyperbole about how awful and corrupt and morally bankrupt and all this kind of stuff. And the guy was like, "That is the best review I could have possibly had for an extreme horror novel."
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's like all the stuff in the 80s, isn't it? With the parental advisory and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's Mary Whitehouse.
Yeah.
It's like half of those movies that got banned, the video nasty craze over here. You know, half of those movies like Driller Killer and things like that.
Oh, Driller Killer.
It was rubbish. It was crap. Yeah. It was basically an hour and a half of a really bad punk band playing in a crappy apartment building, and then the neighbour gets pissed off and kills them. It's just like, that's basically it. And a lot of them were garbage, and the only reason they got any traction whatsoever is because Whitehouse banned them. And so people were like, "Oh, it must be good if it's been banned."
It never works, does it? I think the BBC, wasn't it Mike Reed who banned Frankie Relax?
Frankie Goes to Hollywood, yeah. And
so it goes to number one.
Yeah, same with Zig Zig Sputnik, Love Missile. That was exactly the same.
That banned as well.
Yeah, that was banned as well, because it was all, a bit risque, shooting up your shooting love missile up people and all that kind of business, you know.
And yet that other lot got away with Ebenezer Good.
Oh, the shaman. Yeah. That was hilarious, though. They were actually a really good band. They just did a couple of really crappy hits.
Almost like novelty records, weren't they, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there was quite a few bands that did that back in the day, wasn't it? They obviously made, well, we need some cash. Let's churn out some shite.
Yes. Well, you know, I think as we see with Smith, being very good at your craft is no guarantee of financial success. I mean, it's almost a cliche, isn't it? The struggling artist, but it's very true. And especially this past few years for musicians and artists and performers and DJs and everyone, you know, it's been a tough time.
Yep.
So it always hits me in the feels when you hear that. And as we get some through the other stories and we read how they were rejected by Wright and everything else, even some of the great stories where Smith said, "Yeah, this is a good one."
Yeah.
And Farnsworth Wright goes, "Well, actually, I think it's a bit dull.
Yeah.
I'm not sure our readers will like it."
It's interesting because it seems like Farnsworth Wright was much happier with like the ones that August Derleth himself says was his hack work.
Yeah.
That he just churned out to make a few quid. It's like Farnsworth Wright was happy with that. I guess it's the same as like like pop music, isn't it? It's safe.
Well,
you know,
it's the people in charge. I'm showing my age here because I'm sure it's not the same these days, but well, it is. But the people in charge of pop music at one time were Stock Aitken and Waterman.
Yes, oh God,
they're not signing up Tom Waits for a 4-album deal, are they? And say, "Hey Tom,
no, we're
gonna give you a radiator, some hammers, some Venezuelan guys to play with. Go and make a concept album." You know,
Einstein's the night out and something like that. No, they're gonna go for Jive Bunny.
Yeah. Stick a backing track on it, get a TV celebrity to squawk over it, and
Mr. Blobby. You know.
So there's always been that conflict, and that's just part of art versus commerce.
Of course. Yeah.
And it always, you know, when you go through stuff yourself, you take some comfort in that. Thinking, you know, Mozart was buried in a pauper's grave, right? One of the great musical geniuses of all time.
Exactly. And Lovecraft himself, you know.
Yeah.
He's a perfect example of this.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't have two bloody pennies to rub together by the end, did he? You know, died in abject poverty by all accounts.
Yeah. Well, most of them did. I think there's very few. I know we've spoken on the Innsmouth Book Club about people like Bloch and Leiber.
Yeah.
I guess they were the next generation, weren't they? They were...
Yeah, they were the whippersnappers at this point, weren't they? They were sort of the younger guys.
They were sort of teenagers almost, weren't they, really?
Yeah, they were, yeah. Right. Well, Bloch was, definitely. Yeah.
And perhaps it was just different times. The only outlet then was Weird Tales and the pulps.
Yeah.
Whereas when you got into the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you get cinema. And now, of course, cinema, television, comics, games.
Yeah.
You've got those outlets.
I think you started to get more magazines as well, because even Lovecraft started to branch out from Weird Tales, because for a while it was almost like the only game in town, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There was that, and there was Spicy Adventure Stories, which obviously Howard sent, you know, with his heaving bosoms and his, you know, all that kind of business. But yeah, you can't imagine, say, Lovecraft getting anything in Spicy Adventure Stories, really.
He'd be in unspicy adventures, wouldn't he? Really?
Yeah, exactly.
And I always think, I think I'm right in saying that Lovecraft was very loath to revise anything. I think both Howard and Smith that were accepted, they had to do what they had to do in order to get the check, right?
Yeah.
But Lovecraft stood his ground quite a lot as far as that went, which I guess he paid the price for.
Yeah. Again, in the introduction, Campbell actually says that Lovecraft would basically say no. He would basically put his foot down and say, I don't, you know, he have it written into his contract that no edits can be made on it. Whereas Smith would just gonna go, yeah, I need the money. So
yeah. It's a terrible position to have to be in, because, you know, as any creative, I mean, I have the luxury in some ways of self-publishing, so I'm my own editor.
Yeah.
Which, from creative aspect, is good, but then I often don't know what needs changing in my work. Does that work? Does that not work?
Yeah.
It's very difficult, I find, to judge how good a story is because you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I mean, because obviously I'm with a lot of small press, and I've worked with some really good editors, and I've worked with some not so good editors. I mean, that's just the territory, isn't it? But and I get, for me, it's been a case of learning when to stand my ground, because I have had a story in the past where it came back and they took big chunks out of it, and I went, no. Because it was just like, no, you're not doing that, because it no longer reads like me. That could be any monkey who wrote that,
Well, precisely. You want to keep your own voice,
exactly,
and your own character and your own tone in it.
I'm not precious about edits at all. In fact, I like edits because it just makes you better at the end of the day. But I am precious about my voice. If you stop mucking about with how it reads, then I ain't going to be a happy Teddy, and I will. That's when I'll put my foot down. But
I think when it comes from a good place and a constructive place, constructive criticism is always welcome.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. I mean, as long as it makes sense and all the rest of it. But I think, that's why, because Smith must have been in such a really bad place because of the same thing. What Farnsworth Wright and other editors have done in quite a lot of these stories where they've made heavy edits is take out the colour that makes it uniquely him.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, for me, in that story, they were taking out all the lines, the quips, the turns of phrase.
Right.
And that's the same sort of thing there. So it could have been August Derleth who wrote it, or Lynn Carter or somebody else. It could be bloody anybody who wrote it.
It's generic, isn't it, basically?
Yeah.
It becomes generic, yeah. So, Mr. Smith, we share your pain. We don't share 10% of your talent.
No.
We wish we did.
Very no. That's like, I aspire to be like a tenth of how good Clark Ashton Smith is.
Yeah, it is beautiful writing.
Yeah,
and so evocative and rich, and that's his very first story of the 100. So we've got 99 or so to go, and
awesome.
I think we're both looking forward to delving into these works. I think
very much so.
Yeah.
I'm really looking for. I mean, because there's a few that I haven't read. In fact, there's probably more than a few that I haven't read yet.
The same here, because a lot of these things were lost or
exactly
weren't in the Panther editions or whatever. So, yeah, discovering new Smith is, a wonderful thing. Yeah,
because you tend to find that in all of these, like the Penguin one and the Panther editions and the Lynn Carter edited ones, that you tend to find the same ones cropping up in all of them. So yes. you always get like Return of the Sorcerer, Ubbo Salfa.
Exactly. Yeah. And even then, you don't know if you're getting the edited text or the original text.
Well, this is it. This is it as well, isn't it? It's like looking through. It's like looking at some of the titles. My first thought was, "Oh, I've not read that one," and my second thought was, "How the hell do you pronounce that?"
Yes, more tongue twisters to come, and we shall certainly be consulting the dictionary. And I think we're going to pick a favourite word for every story, aren't we? I think we should. We'll include that in. But do let us know your favourite words as well. Of course, do let us know your thoughts, any corrections you might have on any of our facts and figures.
Yeah. Or our really dodgy pronunciations.
Now, next time, as we said in our introductory episode, some of these stories are quite short. So we're actually covering 3 for the next episode. That's Sedastor, The Ninth Skeleton, and The Last Incantation. So
nice.
Those are the ones we're going to be looking at next time. As we said, do get in touch if you've got any comments or questions. innsmouthbookclub@outlook.com, or post up on our Buzzsprout, and do check our Patreon page if you'd like to support the show. Thanks again to Robert Lloyd Parry for being our reader this episode. Do try and catch him on his Lovecraft tour or any of his excellent Nunkey productions. Now, in our first episode, we also asked if anyone could recommend a good collection of Smith's letters. And we're pleased to say that Mark Griffin got in touch from Kentucky in the States, and he recommended a 2-volume set called Dawnward Spire, Lonely Hill, which is letters between Smith and Lovecraft. So thanks very much for that, Mark. We've got those on order, so we will be referencing those during the upcoming episodes as well. And if anyone else would like to get them, we'll put a link up to those and of course to Nunkey Productions in the show notes below. Okay, that's all for episode 2. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll see you next time. It's goodbye from me, Rob Poyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.
You have been listening to Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast produced by the Innsmouth Book Club in association with Innsmouth Gold. For further information, visit our website at innsmouthgold.com. Because Innsmouth is not just a place, it's a state of mind.